it's just kind of crazy because when I kind of think about the Steve Taylors, you just kind of go through even more of the teams, usually have Terrell and VJ in here. You kind of think about the 90s and, it just kind of takes you more back to top, Steve's talking about his top 5 finishes and all Americans. And
there were teams before that.
But it's just, it's crazy because whatever I like when they were kind of discussing it, and I guess the biggest thing is when they're talking about recruiting, and Steve said something there that I've heard from a lot of former Huskers that you've heard it from Terrell before, which is basically when we get into this recruiting talk, Nebraska, where in its current state of football, just wouldn't get these guys.
No,
they just wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, Steve was talking about how he saw Nebraska in the Orange Bowl, right? When they lost when they lost going for 2, and he's just like, yeah, I want to go there. Like that's the place I want to go.
Is he saw them in the 1993 championship game, and then that's in the forefront of your mind. I remember Ralph Brown. I've asked him that before, and he just kind of put it bluntly, like, dude, I was one of the top recruited players in the nation, so I was going to one of the top schools.
Exactly. I mean, that's what you see from these guys. Is that's why you see all of these recruits going to the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, the Michigans, the Ohio
Nebraska
States.
was once one of those.
Yeah, because those teams are in the playoff. They're at the highest, point in the game of college football. They're making it to national championships. Sometimes they're winning national championships. And if you want to have a successful career, you go to those schools and you build upon the legacy that the people before you built. That's what Nebraska used to have. Is you go there, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, they built all this up. So you go there, you continue to build upon that, but somewhere along the line, something got lost, and it just hasn't been the same for a while. But
but when you talk about it getting lost now too, because we kind of lived through that transition, or at least I have, is that when Nebraska transitioned from Osborne to Solage, obviously there's a drop off. Eventually got Solage, ran out of town or whatever, but they were still one of the top programs in the nation. Since then, obviously, you've had kind of the Callahan years, and so when you were like
up and down.
Well, but when you were into the Callahan years, even Bo, who was more successful and always had a good team to throw out there was still the kind of this idea, you're 3 to 5 years out of your peak of being one of those top programs. I shouldn't say your peak. Your peak's obviously the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Toward the late 90s, early 2000s, Nebraska was still one of those programs. And I always remember kind of the sports talk, the discussions were always like, all right, what's different about Nebraska now and what was going on with those teams that were successful in top 10 teams? And it's so crazy that it's gotten so lost now that it's not what's different. It's like, try to find a similarity. The similarity is the in on the helmet. But other than that, there's just not a whole lot about this program that is similar to what those guys were doing and what the program used to be, where Tom Osborne had it for all those years. And, you can kind of see it through, when you look at like championship games. Turn on a Nebraska championship game. And again, it's littered with guys that just wouldn't consider Nebraska right now. And it's littered with just NFL players, all Americans, all Big 8, just littered. I mean, like 8, 9, 10 of the 11 guys on the field are recognizable names, even to generations later. And, now Nebraska's lucky to get a draft pick here in the 5th round here and there. You know what I mean? Like that's so, that's why I always go back to it. And there's all, you can go to the argument about what's so different. It's like, you got to have the dudes. And now Nebraska, you can say the brand name still resonates and it's still big deals to parents out there. And, it can still help you get some recruits. But it ain't what it was.
No,
it is not what it was, and it's going to take it's not a rebuild. It's like building from start to get back into that conversation to where Nebraska can just have top 100 kids just interested by the letter Nebraska to see the end and say, okay, that's going to be one of my top schools.
Yeah, it's how the mighty have fallen. But you talk about the parents and how them growing up watching Nebraska, that does help a little bit, but at the same time, it's going to be hard to convince, a kid nowadays who you're getting kids that were born after the year 2002 now. Like Nebraska really hasn't had much success after that national championship appearance in 2001. Yeah. And even that appearance wasn't the greatest of times. So trying to convince these kids that Nebraska was once at the top of the game. Like Nebraska was what Alabama is now. Like they were the program that everyone was, shooting for. That was the number one team. They got their best shot from everybody every single game out. And to convince some of these kids of that is kind of hard, because you think about something like that and you never believe that something that was so successful can fall into the depths of what Nebraska has fallen into right now. And you talk about getting the dudes, and if everybody you want to talk about recruiting classes, and Nebraska has to have a top 25 recruiting class. Now they're in the top 25 in the recruiting classes. But if you think back, even Scott Frost and Mike Riley, they had top 25 recruiting classes. It matters. Yes, it's very important to go out and get the dudes who are highly ranked, highly recruited, who have all of this talent. But once they get here, and we've talked about this ad nauseum for the longest time, it's what you do with them when they get onto campus, not what they do at high school level before they get here that is going to bring you back to prominence. It's what you do with them after they get here, the strength and conditioning, the nutrition, the practices, everything, all encompassing to get you back to where you want to be, or even close to where you want to be, back to being, finishing a season in the top 25. I mean, when's the last time Nebraska did that? Like not start the season in the top 25.
Not a quick appearance.
Finish the season in the top 25. That's success.
Well, that was always the question when at the end of the 9-4 and 10-4 years with Bo was like, are going to be 22nd, 23rd, or going to be just outside? So he's going to get up to 14.
Yeah. But at the end of the season, it'll be like 23.
Yeah. But either way, that's way better than what we have now, obviously. And, with the recruiting rankings, and certainly like you were pointing out too, it's important with the development, equally as important. But, it is maybe a thing where eventually you do kind of have to change your mindset. And I know that the top 25 is just kind of, that's at least makes you feel like you're in,
that's
in
just
play.
It's a starting point.
Right. But that's kind of what Steve Taylor too was saying when he's on the captain, is like, if you want to be one of those teams, you got to be top 10. If you want to be like one of the traditional teams that's going to be have a puncher's chance at like a national championship every year, be a team to look out for in the conference race, you got to recruit at that level. And there are a few exceptions to that. In TCU this year, that's what makes this ride so special. Is TCU is kind of an exception to that. Now, is there going to be stability through that program? Usually when you kind of see that, there's an equalizer there at quarterback. I think they have an equalizer right now with Max Duggan, who, that stings a little bit more because, again, he could be maybe the equalizer for Nebraska, having coming out of Council Bluffs. But, it's there's a lot of ways to win, basically. But there's not a lot of ways to be one of those top programs. And recruiting certainly plays a big part of that. We're a little bit behind on break, so we'll take a quick break here and return to more talk. There's lots going on in the sports world, and we'll jump into it. Also, I wanted to ask Rico if, he's a father. Would he trust a self-driving stroller that can roll out?
No.
Hey, you're supposed to wait.
No.
He might not. We'll talk about that too. Coming up next here on Think of Water Cooler 93.7 The Ticket.